Welcome to the Melinda Eitzen Show. I'm Melinda. Today we have with us Susan Duesler. She's a lawyer and an advocate for children. Welcome, Susan.
Hi.
I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm great to be here.
So I'm calling you an advocate for children. It's not your official title.
Sure. Attorney, yeah.
But you do a lot of your work is advocating, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It kind of built that way. You know, I didn't necessarily start off as a family lawyer. I fell into it. And then after doing quite a bit of CPS work, it became a lot more kid-centered at that point.
So you like the kid stuff. I do too.
Sometimes, yes.
It depends on the day.
Yeah, certainly.
Sometimes the court appoints you to specifically either represent the children or kind of represent the court on behalf of the children. Is that right?
Yes.
What do you call that?
Well, there's three different things that could be called. So if I'm an attorney ad litem, I'm the actual children's attorney. You know, whatever the kids want, that is what I advocate for. You are the kid's attorney, your loyalties to them, you have attorney-client privilege. Sometimes I might be appointed as a guardian ad litem where I'm looking out for the best interest, and I still do have a special privilege with the kids, but it's a little bit different. And then other times, the court will appoint me as an amicus, and that's either whether the court says, hey, there's some issues in this case, and I want you to look into it further, or it's extremely high conflict, which is mostly when they come in, or the parties' attorneys will say, hey, I think an amicus could really help on this, and we can talk about that a little more if you'd like, actually. Lately I've seen amicus attorneys being requested, sometimes for, hey, we've got some issues we want you to look at, or we just want the kids to have a voice. Well, that's a little bit different than the role, but it's kind of morphed a little bit, I think, with the new statutes and things like that come in.
Yeah, over our careers, it's changed, right?
Yes.
We didn't have the amicus, at least I've been practicing 30 years. I don't think there was an amicus the whole time. It was more the guardian or the attorney ad litem. And the roles, like you described, are a little different. It's confusing. Would you agree?
Sometimes, yeah.
Even for lawyers,
Yeah.
we're like, which one is that? What is that role?
Well, and to make sure I do it, I'll just tell you one of the things that I do is I go back to the family code. It flat out says, here's what these roles are, the differences between the three. And I print the one for that one to make sure I'm focused on that role and stick with it.
Oh, that's smart. And every case involving children, and when we say involving children, it could be a divorce, but it could be they were never married,
Right.
but they're fighting over custody, or it could be post-divorce. So those are all the ones involving children. But not every case involving children has one of these roles, true?
Right, correct. The vast majority do not.
And why would someone, a court or the parties in the case, want to involve someone in this way?
Yeah, so I think I kind of mentioned before, high conflict. That's where I see the most of it is when you have parents that either can't get along themselves or are involving the children, or if there's some major issue, or if step parents become involved. There's lots of different reasons it could come in, but for any reason it could be, high conflict, I would say, is the most.
And how is that role paid? How are you paid when you're in one of those roles?
Yeah, so it depends on which of the three I'm in. So if it's through a CPS case, then obviously there's a fund for that. It goes through everything on that. You do a little bit of a public service because, your bills are subject to approval from different different courts, different parameters, things like that. On an amicus case, the parties pay for it. And so, let's say my fee is a set amount. Most of the time, the parties will end up having to pay 50-50 on it.
So they're paying their own lawyer. They don't have to have their own lawyer, but
Right.
usually they do, right?
Right.
They're paying their own lawyer, and then they're paying half of the amicus, and the other party's paying their own lawyer and
Most
half
of the time, yes.
So it could be expensive.
Yes.
So you wouldn't do it in every case. It's when there's really a need.
Correct.
Do you think from the court's perspective, if the court's appointing, that the court needs help because they don't feel like either parent is really advocating for the kids?
Yeah, sometimes, or maybe they just want to investigate an issue further. They're hearing something, whether it be from a temporary orders hearing or from pleadings, that kind of alerts them, and they say, I need somebody to look into it a little bit more than I can as a judge. So you become an arm of the court in that regard, and that's what an amicus actually is it's a friend of the court. You're not representing the child. They're not your client. Arguably, the court's your client, but you don't really have the same degree of privilege that you do with the other two that we mentioned.
How does it differ, an amicus or these roles, from a child custody evaluation?
I'm glad you actually brought that up, because I think now the second time that I'm seeing, appointments come in is if you're either close to trial and they need some issues taken care of or just narrow issues determined. And sometimes they try to make it in place of a child custody evaluation. That's not my role by far. Like when I'm serving as amicus, I don't have to take a side. Sometimes I'll naturally align with a side, but it's certainly not anything that I pick and make orders, anything like a judge would do. If we really go into, I guess it depends on what what the issues are at hand.
I agree with you that
Yeah.
I'm seeing people want to appoint an amicus instead of a child
And
custody
they think it's cheaper,
evaluation.
which sometimes it could be, depending on the levels of it, but it depends on the issues involved.
And what they're trying to get at is they want a neutral person. The judge can't run around and investigate, right?
Right.
That's not proper. So a child custody evaluator would typically, under the family code, be trying to kind of investigate and make a recommendation to the court on what would be best. When should this child be with each parent? What are the concerns that they discover? The amicus could be in a similar role, right? Reporting to the court, hey, this is what I'm finding. Here's some concerns at mom's house. Here's some concerns at dad's house. Here's some concerns the child has.
Here's the co-parenting issues, and a lot of times it's the parents. It's not necessarily the kids. Sometimes the kids could have specific issues that need to be addressed. Sometimes the parents view the other parent as, we have the buzzwords, right? Like narcissist, things like that everyone's convinced that everyone in a case is. And sometimes they really are. But, it used to be the buzzword of alienating. You remember? And a lot of times those are, excuse me, those are issues that kind of come up that, are underlying or just co-parenting problems where, okay, your kid's in the middle. Let's talk about this. This is what the child's saying. Tell me your concerns about the other parent. Let's investigate those and see what's going on.
So when we started, I said you're an advocate for children. And when I say that, and when you're in one of these roles, what can you do to advocate for the children? If you see, hey, these kids need services, for example, or these kids need out of XYZ situation, what are you empowered to do to advocate for them?
Well, I act just as an attorney in the case. So, part of the reason I actually like the amicus work is because, you kind of like the attorney in the case, for the parties. You're able to present evidence, you're able to call witnesses, you're able to do all kinds of things that you would do as an attorney. So when I'm advocating for a kid, or children, especially like when they're smaller, and they can't really voice everything, you look at the circumstances, the relationships of everybody, what the kid's needs are. If they have a possession schedule, for instance, that's just tearing the kid up, they're constantly having to go back and forth between mom and dad's house, like 2 to 3 times of exchanges per week, it may not necessarily work for the children as much, and sometimes the parents, I always say this, they lose the forest for the trees. They see just the issues with the other parent. They don't see the impact on the kids. And so being able to advocate and say, here's how the child is impacted by the actions of the parents or by the situation that they're in, just in general. That's one way. Sometimes I can advocate that the parents actually have some services, such as go to counseling or do co-parenting classes. There's a couple books that we sometimes refer them to. For the children, sometimes we'll say, hey, they really need to get in with a counselor for this specific issue or an educational consultant on this specific type of thing as well.
And thank goodness, I mean, there's some kids struggling and a child cannot pick up the phone and hire a lawyer.
And shouldn't. Yeah.
And say, help me, I need help. So it's wonderful to have this role in some
Right.
cases to give the child a voice. And humans are flawed, and we have really good people not at their best in family law a lot, right? So sometimes, like you said, they can't see the forest for the trees. It's not that they don't want to do right by their child.
Right.
They just are not at their best. They're going through a trauma themselves.
And the other person knows how to get to them. I mean, they were in a relationship with them. They know what pushes the buttons. It just happens. And sometimes naturally the reactions happen too. Some of the things that we see in our practice, just with our own clients, when we're representing parents, it's just natural to react. You get something, your first instinct is automatically to assume, well, take a step back and look forward. And sometimes parents can't do that. And sometimes the attorneys make things worse too.
Oh my goodness,
But-
that's the truth.
Right.
You mentioned some reference some resources, like some books.
Yeah.
I'm betting one is a Bill Eddy book.
Yes. There's actually two that I like.
Oh, good. Tell us.
So the first one, they're the Biff books. And I had to go look it up because I always forget exactly what the BIFF, but it's brief, informative, firm, and friendly. And to me, well, I think it might be friendly and firm, but either way, friendly to me is one of the biggest things, because what I've always told my own clients, whether when I'm representing in a divorce or in a child custody suit, is this judge or whoever is going to look at your screenshot in a vacuum. They're not going to know all of the history behind it. They're not going to know any of it, period. And we don't have enough time to do it. We've got time limits. We can't present years and years worth of anything. And so they're going to look at this, and if you are cursing them out, they're going to automatically ignore it. It's if you're reacting quickly, then they're going to ignore it. So I tell people this is a really great book for it. But he also has a second book that is about social media and how to react, when things are either posted or in the advent of that.
So Bill Eddy, he writes these books to help people in high conflict situations, how to communicate more effectively with a high conflict person. So that's important, because so many of our people are doing that. And really, even though he's writing it, maybe with our situations in mind, it could apply to anyone, right? Just how to communicate. And he has like 3 A's, I think, of don't admonish, don't give advice. I can't remember the third A.
Right.
But I like that. And I tell all my clients, read the Biff books, and then when they do something not very Biff,
Right.
they'll be like, Melinda, I know this wasn't Biff.
Yeah. And it's good. And sometimes there's also another one that's, and depending on the circumstances of the case, I might recommend for parties to do one parenting class over another. There's one that I really like called Between Two Homes. Before COVID, they had the in-person class. And sometimes I said, these people need to go in person, not online, because they need to be forced to listen to this. But one of them, on that specific, on that specific parenting class, part 1 is the adults and part 2 is the children, or the reverse. But either way, there's one saying, here's how you deal with the co-parenting aspect of it. Here's how you deal with the children while they're watching you two co-parent, because they do. Kids see everything, and they'll tell on their parents too. So,
So behave.
Yeah.
Well, I've heard mental health professionals say that children in divorce turn out no better, no worse of children of intact families if the parents do not have a bunch of conflict in front of the kids.
Right.
So that's part of what they teach them in this co-parenting class, right? Is it's not healthy.
Right.
I've had cases, and I know you have too, where they won't even speak to the other person. Like, what is your child reading into that?
Yeah. And it's amazing, and I hate the term parallel parenting more than anything, because I think people think it's something different than it is, but I have run across that too. And sometimes that is the high conflict answer, is y'all can't communicate. Just don't. Keep it at this. But the catch is on that they have to actually have open lines of everything, such as put the other person on every single communication. Just have it automatically be there. Y'all don't need to talk to each other. Just leave it with the professionals that handle it. But that's in rare cases. Most of the time you have to co-parent.
If you can't say, treat them like you would a stranger,
well,
and say good morning.
Right. Right. And I have noticed that in the past 4 years, communication has changed. I think, during COVID, people learned how to work from home. They learned how to be behind a screen, hiding, quick to text, very fast. The boundaries are not there. I don't know about you, but I get emails all night. And a lot of times the parents are doing that same thing with each other. And so it's just a very quick reaction, getting people to kind of step back and realize where they are. It's sometimes a challenge. And a lot of times I see that in amicus cases.
I've heard you can delay your email. Like, you can set a permanent setting on your email when you push send, it delays before it sends, so that you could retrieve it if you went, oh, I sent that to the wrong person or something. It would be nice if texting had that same feature.
Well, I think they're going to. I looked at something yesterday, and I think that there might be some feature, but it's not an automatic. It might be a delayed text where you can, remember to say happy birthday, I think is what the press release said on one of the new iOS. They said that you could set it for 10 a.m. the next morning so you don't forget. And I thought, well, that would be good. But for these people, they need usually something more than just a 1 or 2 time reminder. Yeah, but sometimes I'll tell clients, whether it's me representing my actual client, the parent, or in an amicus case where I'm talking to the parents or their attorneys, hey, 24-hour rule. Do not respond to any of that. Read it, because on Our Family Wizard or something like that, it'll say when
Yes.
you've read it, think about your response, then write it, because your response at the very first moment is going to be different than it will be 24 hours later.
That's a great tip and rule. So you mentioned Our Family Wizard. That's a wonderful tool
Yeah.
also. Tell the audience about that.
Yeah, so it's actually got a couple more features from when I started using it with my clients. It's great because it has all communication there, so you don't have to constantly be searching between emails, anything like that. It's also wonderful because if for people that don't communicate well, it shows when they've read it. So if you have somebody that's just not replying, not doing anything, it kind of forces that, and it shows when the logins are, it shows when every single message was viewed the first time. It doesn't show how many times thereafter, but it shows the first time. I like it also because it's storage online for everything. It's got the kids' calendar you can plug in. It's got their doctor information you can put in. It's all right there. It does come with a cost, that they, depending on
It's not
which plan.
much though, right?
It's
like
not.
$150 for
Yeah.
a year.
And they have some new features in it that I just did a CLE or attended a CLE on it, and they actually have some really interesting things that they can do, such as, and I've seen it on my clients too, where they'll check in at the visit so that they can, it's like a geo tagging saying, oh no, you can only check in within 500 feet of the location you're supposed to be at. And so it can prove you're there to help with enforcements, things like that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, because in order for someone to say, hey, I was supposed to have the child
Right.
on this day and time,
They
they
have
have
to
to
prove.
show up at the
Right.
time.
Now, they'll
and
still have a
prove
hearsay
it.
objection, obviously, because, authenticating it through Our Family Wizard,
Yes.
but at least they could say, hey, this is where I am. If you're, let's say it's an area like this where there's 2 or 3 buildings, where are you? And communication
Yes.
needs to be through that. So it's really helpful. A lot of times you can see on it, depending on how they structure their communication, you can see the whole chain, kind of like emails where it's like this person's replying to this person, replying to this.
Yes.
And it's still on it shows, how everybody's viewed. So that's really helpful for me.
Are you ever invited? I know that Our Family Wizard has the professional feature where a professional can be invited to view.
Yep.
They don't have to sign in as one of the people. You ever invited on your child advocate cases to view their communication?
Yes, and sometimes I request it too. I'll even do that for some of my private clients too, because it's just helpful for us to be able to say, okay, I know what you're summarizing for me. Let me just read it myself real quick and see what I
Yes.
want to do. But I do on the amicus cases, especially because not on every one of them, and I certainly don't check it daily, and I don't check it just because one party's saying, hey, he or she is doing something. They always want you to act very quickly. I don't do it too much because then I'd have to build too much, right? I do it when necessary. But you can see the line of who's responding, who's not, what kind of communications there, maybe make suggestions. That's one of the roles of the amicus is to help further the case along, find settlement, find ways that maybe they can get along. A lot of times the parties don't even realize that they do have agreements on things because they just want to argue about the 1 or 2 minor things that aren't.
Right. So you could give a little coaching.
Yes, a little bit. Yeah.
Is maybe don't say that again.
Yes, that's said a lot. Yeah.
Use your I words. Don't accuse them of being a horrible parent in every
Right.
communication.
Yeah, maybe not the best way to put things. Yeah, that's
You mentioned CPS cases. So what does that mean? What would your role be in a
Yeah, so
CPS
I've
case?
actually do most every role in CPS. I represent parents when, I don't do, I guess I should backtrack. I have represented people before. I do some of that when people first get the investigation and, hey, CPS wants to talk to you. Done that plenty of times. I would say the majority of my experience in the beginning came from just representing parents in court once they've actually filed to either remove your child from your care temporarily or terminate your rights or anything like that. I did that, and then it's kind of moved into kids from there. And so I've actually done several different jury trials and many, many, many bench trials relating to, whether a parental rights should be terminated, both on behalf of the children or on behalf of a parent.
So what is that role called if you're appointed to represent the child in a CPS case?
Most of the time, you'll actually serve in a dual role, and it's kind of interesting. You'll be both the guardian ad litem and the attorney ad litem, and if there's ever a conflict, it switches and you become just one. So, you have to be looking out for the best interest when you're a guardian, and then what the kid wants. If they're ever so in conflict, then there's a separate one. And a lot of times that'll be like when there's a teenager, because teenagers very much have their own opinions. But for the most part, you can serve as both. You visit with the children, especially if they're in foster parent placement. That's really, really helpful to go do. You need to do it because you got to actually meet your client to find out what's going on. From there, you'll represent them in court just as a regular attorney. In a CPS case, when the Department of Family and Protective Services comes in, they will have specific hearings that you have to have along the way. You'll participate in each of those. At the trial, you're just like a regular attorney. Same with amicus, where you present evidence, you have a closing, you have everything.
So termination of parental rights, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And that means they're not their parent anymore. They can't come back, true?
And the grandparents out too, yeah. With one exception, there is something in law now that says that after a certain amount of time, if you can prove that those circumstances don't exist and that there is no danger of that happening, and the children haven't been adopted by someone else out of CPS care, then they can come back and try to do it. But it's extremely hard to get that burden. Very, very, very hard, which is why people don't even know about it, because you'd have to prove it in so many ways that you can't. For instance, most of these people that'll have it may have a court-appointed attorney and may not know that they need to keep working either with an attorney or looking into certain things for the next few years. And it's just one of those things that, it's out there, but probably not possible.
Yeah, so that's sad. So usually termination is the parent is either abusive and it can't be solved, or they have a mental health disorder
or drug
and it
issue,
can't be
things
solved.
like that. Yeah, but it's one of those can't be solved, have tried everything. A lot of times in a CPS case, it would be they were given a service plan, they failed to follow it. Certain things you have to do to even consider the return of a child. But again, though, a service plan doesn't guarantee it. But there's also private terminations too, where the parent, maybe there's just I don't want to say a bad parent, but a parent that's not necessarily pulling their weight, or hadn't paid child support, and maybe there's a step parent that wants to adopt, so they need to do a private termination, and I've handled those as well.
And in that role, are you helping the parent who wants to have probably their new spouse adopt?
It depends on who my client is. Yeah.
I see.
So I can represent the petitioner, the person filing to terminate someone's rights, or the respondent, the person whose rights are somebody seeking to terminate, or the child in that too. And in that role, it could either be usually an attorney ad litem or an amicus, depending on the age.
And is there a certain reporting to the court that has to happen, even if everyone agrees? There has to be certain reporting that this is the best thing.
Yeah, well, the guardian ad litem certainly has to make in a report. The amicus attorney usually does too. The attorney ad litem just advocates what the child wants, so they, it's pretty obvious at that point. All of your evidence lines up with it, your questions line up with it, your closing argument. But if there's a complete agreement, they do have to have somebody representing the child just to make sure that this is absolutely in the child's best interest. They just double check everything, and they report back to the court on the same.
So when you represent clients that are not children, you're representing adults.
Sure.
And sometimes you're representing adults in a custody case. And what advice do you give them to get the best possible result about their behavior and about, getting ready maybe to meet an amicus in that case, or a child custody evaluation?
Sure. Well, it's interesting that you ask it that way. So one of the things when I'm an amicus, one of the things that I do when I'm an amicus is that I'll actually say, hey, give me the concerns that you have about the other parent. You develop kind of a theme if you're the parent doing it. So you need to be able to present it such that the person can say, okay, these are the facts, not a conclusion. And so I usually even tell people when I'm amicus, hey, that's a conclusion. Tell me the facts on why you think that. Okay, he's a narcissist. Why is he a narcissist? Tell me what's going on. So what I'll tell my clients when I'm representing parents is, don't automatically say he's
jump
this,
to
he's
the
that,
conclusion,
even if it's clear as a conclusion. And sometimes it is. You want to say, no, here are the facts that have lined up. Here's the proof. Because if you have somebody that you can convince of that, they'll help you convince the judge of the same. So
yes, that makes sense. Yeah, I will say we go through phases where there's a popular accusation. Right now, it's everyone's a narcissist and they're gaslighting.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And I think that's because of culture, right?
Sure.
It's out in the world, and so people are reading about it and hearing about it. And there certainly are some gaslighting narcissists,
100%.
but probably not every single person who walks the earth.
And there's some elements of it with everything, right?
Right.
Like a narcissist isn't just someone that is X. It's like 75 different characteristics, and you can be
Right.
1 or 75 or 20,
Yes.
And a little bit of that, I mean, probably even from listening
We
to
all-
us.
we
are
all
a little
have
bit, right?
some. We all have
Yeah.
some.
And so, I mean, and I found in family law, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you really want to call someone something, you basically can find anything to fit what it is. It's just, you can't come to that conclusion. So that's why I tell people, let's start with the facts. Let's go through that. And then, by the way, if you have a lot of facts on this, then they'll come to that conclusion. If not, we either need to develop a theme on how it impacts the child, or we need to abandon that and get into something more serious.
Yeah, sometimes somebody's irritating, but it really has nothing to do with their parenting.
Right.
It's not impacting the child. The government doesn't get involved in your life because you're not the perfect parent, right? The government only gets involved if it's to a level of abuse or neglect, where it is impacting. Same with even out of the CPS
private cases,
world. Private cases.
Yeah.
The judge doesn't want to micromanage people's lives.
Right. And even then, they want to complain about one thing, but it's not anything that the court can do anything about.
Right.
Like I'll give you an example, a haircut. Like when people get really upset about a haircut for a child, well, number one, hair grows. Number two, the court's not going to make an order that says only mom can take the child to get their haircut. It's not going to happen.
I have had some dramatic haircut cases. It's the first haircut.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Well, that's the emotional side too. Right.
The first haircut, how dare the new girlfriend take the child for their first haircut. Oh my goodness.
Right. And some of that isn't the haircut as much as, okay, you weren't even thinking of the other side. Like, this is where y'all should have gone together or, whatever it is. But I'm glad you brought in the girlfriend too, because I think sometimes people don't realize that the third parties control a lot more than they should. And so sometimes that creates a problem. Sometimes they're great. They're fantastic. They can, help with some of the regular day-to-day things, and that's normal. And sometimes the other parent who maybe hasn't moved on and found somebody else, it doesn't really like that much involvement is there, but it's natural. They're in the house. They have to be involved. And so sometimes you have to kind of coach the client that, hey, this is something that the court's not going to say you can't date anybody. The court's not going to say you can't ever marry anybody. The court's not going to say that she can't ever pick up your son.
Right.
It's just not going to happen. So,
yeah, hopefully if everybody is healthy and good people, the more people who love your child, the better, and that help your child. But sometimes maybe it happened too fast. Maybe it's the person who they were having an affair with during the marriage. It's hard for everyone to accept that person at first. And so, why stick it in their face?
And maybe they don't need to, they just need to coexist though, and they have to do it for the children.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I like child cases too, and I think one reason I do is the facts are not stagnant. Like when you're representing someone on a child case, they're changing every day, right? They're still living their lives.
More and more text messages happen every day. Supplement discovery every day because they can't stop.
But we can help them by coaching them. Like if they want to improve, we can tell them, hey, stop doing this and start doing that.
Yeah, for real.
And make them not only their case better, but we could actually make them better parents. I had one where the client was spending a lot of time at what I will call a breast-a-rant.
Oh.
You know what I mean?
I do.
And he didn't really have a life. He was just giving his phone number to the waitresses with over-tipping and giving his phone number to the women at the restaurant. And I said, well, maybe we need to find a more positive way for you to spend your time. And I sent him to church. And he really did get involved in that church. He ended up, and it wasn't even the church that I attend. It wasn't even the same religion. It was just convenient to him,
Well, it's just a redirection. It'd be whether it be behavior or a hobby, just encourage them to find something else if one thing is a problem.
Yes, and go take your child to swimming lessons instead of to the breast.
Or get how about you do something with your kiddo,
Right.
Like let's say you guys both have an interest in, whatever. Why don't y'all just go there instead? Do this. This is what your child. Now that's why an amicus could be helpful is because I can say, hey, your kid's really interested in guitar, or hey, your kid's really into baseball or fishing. I had one that was a fishing
Yes.
case. Just go fish with your kid. I don't care if you hate it and you
Yes.
smell it. It's super important to him, so you're going to love it because he's going to think you love it then.
Yes.
Hmm.
And, some of that seems instinctual, but it isn't always for
Right.
people. And if they, they're not always, they don't have a plan for being a divided
Well, and it may not
family.
be easy and practical, but sometimes you have to
Yes.
do those things for the kids that, yes, that means you can't go to your group on Tuesday because you have to go do this with your son. But if that's what's going to improve the relationship and keep it, you have to do that.
Yes.
Um,
What do you do if you have a child? Let's say you're the attorney ad litem. So you're the role that you do what the child says. What do you do if the child's saying something you don't agree with?
Well, you unfortunately have to be bound by the client's representation on the attorney ad litem side. Sometimes I'll say, okay, kind of like with a parent, because this happens in divorce cases all the time too. I want you to do this, this, this. Well, that's going to be very adverse to your goal. So, depending on what the age of the kiddo is, I'll sit down with them, I'll talk with them away from their parents. We always get away from the parents. And by the way, try to talk to them in both environments so that one isn't coaching. And say, okay, do you really want to do this? What is your goal? Like, you want to do this, but let's talk about this because this is actually going to make things worse. What do you think? If they still want to move forward on that, then you have no choice but to do it. If you're a guardian or amicus, you can kind of take it a step further and say, well, I don't know if that's the best thing. And you advocate for what is the best thing.
I like that better. But I like your approach about the goal. I do the same thing with my client because people are in an emotional state,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes they can't stay focused on
And that's
what's
natural.
their goal.
Yeah.
And we have to take the time to educate them.
Right.
Hey, let's go back to your goal. When you came in, you said it was very important to you, XYZ. But now what you're directing me to do is not consistent with that.
Right.
And this is why. But they don't know that until we tell them.
Right.
And, sometimes lawyers can be busy and they may not take the time to educate like that. And they just go and do that crazy thing and it's not even good.
Well, and one thing, this is kind of a pet peeve of mine, is when the lawyer just does whatever the client says without saying, this is
Yes.
not in my kid's best interest. This is not anything. Maybe it becomes the lawyer's best interest for a little bit, but sometimes you have to be able to tell your client what the reality of things are. And I'm potentially maybe too at fault for this because I'm kind of blunt, in case you can't tell. But it depends on what they're going for. But I think attorneys need to be more mindful of the end game rather than the profit game sometimes.
Yes.
It's kind of created a little bit of a problem in the courts, and it ultimately doesn't actually benefit the clients whatsoever, whether it's the kid or the parent.
Agreed. So to be appointed in all the different roles you talked about,
Yeah.
do you have to have a certain certification or training?
Well, that's another. It depends. In order to get on some appointment wheels for CPS things, you have to have handled some things on your own, completely independent. And there's a certain rubric. Every court's different on that. And then recertification every year. For amicus, it depends on your experience. They're not going to put a baby lawyer as an amicus on most cases because you just don't know. I'm 17 years into this. This is when I finally feel a little bit comfortable, I mean, for real, because, you're a baby lawyer for so long, but you don't realize, what a baby lawyer actually means. We have a lot of young lawyers that, whether it be the last 4 years of the way things have shifted in society, a lot of people are taking on things that are maybe a little beyond, but at the same time with amicus, it's kind of hampered on that because it's a court's choice. So I have all the time where some attorneys that I know very well will say, hey, I think Susan's a perfect fit for this because she's this, she's that. She has a lot of experience. She's really good at co-parenting, whatever it is. And the court may accept that or they may reject it. It just depends. There are some courts that I've had more experience in than others. It just depends on where it is.
So if you were a client that was looking to have an amicus appointed, you'd want to find somebody with some experience.
Absolutely.
Because it is a unique role and they need to. I had an experience where we had an amicus just kind of go rogue and do some crazy stuff. So you want somebody who understands the role, what's appropriate, what's
And
not
can
appropriate.
get people to talk too, because a lot of people, well, they've been trained, whether they're a witness on a case or they're one of the parties themselves, they've been taught, make sure you only say this because it's going to help or hurt our case either way. And if you can get them to really tell the truth, then it's great. So, you kind of, the more you do it, the more you get a little bit more experienced on how to talk to the kids and get them to tell you anything. And they will. Every single kid will do it. Even if at the beginning you have a teenager that's really, really staunch in their beliefs, eventually you can kind of get some things out of them. And it takes a little bit of perseverance, and it's not a one-time, negotiation. You're not sitting in, a room alone with them with no anything, just, interrogating them, anything like that. It's got to be natural. And so there will be several visits that you'll have with them to do that.
So what's the name of your firm, Susan?
I'm a solo practitioner, so I'm the law office of Susan Duesler.
Oh, that's great. So we'll put on the screen how to find you.
Sure.
And you represent people in the whole DFW area?
I do. Yeah, I primarily do Dallas and Tarrant County, but those are my two main ones. I do handle some of the others. And we love mediating with people like you, Melinda.
Oh, you're so kind.
You help the cases.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank
It's
you.
been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. This has been the Melinda Eitzen Show with Susan Duesler, Advocate for Children.